Okay, we are a very small group. Does anyone mind if we have a chat down here? We're small. We can have a fun conversation. My name is Liz Wiseman. I am a researcher, a writer. I study leadership and the effect that leaders have on intelligence and the effect that they have on intelligence of other people. And what I wanted us to do for the next short 30 minutes is to have a conversation about what kind of leadership do you need to create an environment of education. Not only an environment of education in a classroom where students are learning, but what kind of leadership do you need to create an environment of education in the staff room so that everyone who is there serving the student is operating at their best. I want to get us started just with a question, and the question is a simple one. Why do some leaders amplify intelligence and others drain it? Or in other words, why are we so smart and capable around some people but not around others? I want to take you back to one of the first times I began to wonder about this. It was the summer of 1989, August. Is there anyone here who began their professional career in 1989? Dave, did you?
I did, actually.
And you know, I have a feeling you were probably wearing a brand new interview suit from Nordstrom's.
I don't know if it's from Nordstrom's, but it was a new suit.
Brand new interview suit. I want to tell you about Stephanie. She is wearing her interview suit, brand new interview suit from Nordstrom. She's clutching in her hand a newly minted degree, a master's in education from the Stanford University Graduate School of Education. She starts her first real job. She's going to be working as a training coordinator in a tech company. And she is just full of ideas. She's bursting with ideas. She's brimming with energy. She sort of soars through the doors of her new employer. That's August. But by the time springtime comes around, all of this energy and these ideas have dimmed. Now, part of her job, you know, some of the reason why it had dimmed is she figured out, like many of us, do you remember back your first entry-level, first job out of school? She discovered, like many of us do, that those entry-level jobs involve a fair bit of administration. And she's discovered that she's going to spend time making copies of class evaluations and ordering training supplies and sort of tidying up the training room. But that disappointment's nothing compared to the disappointment she experiences from her boss, who micromanages every detail of this education operation and has this way of creating stress everywhere she goes. See, it wasn't good enough that Stephanie got those course evaluations and distributed them to the higher ups in the organizations, but she had to do it just so. And some of those copies required a staple, and other recipients who were going to get them needed to see those paper clipped. And she said, you know, that was one of the important parts of her job. And her boss instilled kind of the fear of God in her, that if somehow she got the paper clip versus staple wrong, the entire global operation was going to come to a halt. So Stephanie kind of did what a lot of us would do, played it safe, started to do the minimum. And, you know, her boss noticed this, being the micromanaging type, called her into her office and had a chat with Stephanie. And, you know, because at that point, Stephanie admitted, I wasn't doing much of anything well. And her boss had the talk with her, and you can imagine the talk. And Stephanie, in her defense, said, well, you know, it only takes about 10% of my capability to do my assigned tasks. And she begs for something more challenging to do. But undeterred by this, her boss sends her back to her cubicle with the directive, we need you to work harder. Now, about 2 months transpire, and a new manager is assigned to the group, one of Stephanie's peers, who can see that this smart Stanford grad actually is bright and has a lot of drive. She calls Stephanie into her office and says, Stephanie, you know, we're spending too much time on distributing all these paper evaluations. This is back in 1989, a lot of paper happening then. And she said, we need to automate this system. We need to create an online education system. And of course, that's sounding very good to Stephanie, who's standing at the copier for much of her day. And she says, we need an online evaluation system, and I need you to build that. Now, Stephanie confessed that at that point in her career, her tech skills consisted of using WordPerfect to write papers in grad school. Her boss, you know, just kind of drops down onto her desk this stack of software manuals and says, learn how to use this software, and let's see if you can get a working prototype up and running in the next 3 months. And she reminds her, she gives her some specs for this system, and she reminds her that this is on top of her day job. She still needs to perform all of her administrative work. Stephanie suddenly was on fire. She described this experience as one of the most difficult, challenging experiences of her career, but she described it as exhilarating. The prototype that she built got put into use and went on to become a production system of record for this company, housed by the IT department. Stephanie went on to become one of the top technical educators for this organization, and is still in education today. And observing this situation and talking about Stephanie through her experience, it helped me see that sometimes with a change of capability comes a change in command, comes a change in capability. I was so fascinated by this that I set out to research this, to find out why. Why is it that some leaders seem to magnify, amplify, or multiply, as I came to call it, intelligence in other people? This little observation turned in sort of a curiosity and then a research obsession. And it really began with this observation that inside of our workplaces, our teams, our companies, our schools, is more intelligence than we can see with our naked eye. Many of the presentations today are talking about how do we take and give opportunity to this hidden, often disconnected intelligence. And from that came this idea that a leader can be a multiplier. And what that means is, as a multiplier, you use your intelligence, your knowledge, your skill, your tech savvy, maybe your knowledge of education, you use that to amplify the intelligence of people around you. And that people working around and for multipliers literally get smarter and more capable. That's the idea. And as I spent the last few years out teaching this idea into the business world, we found that it's resonated with educators. In fact, we found that it resonates where there's 3 conditions that come together. One, organizations who have to do more with less. As we heard today from Michael Crow, how do we increase quality and reduce the cost of a degree? Organizations that are driving an innovation agenda. How do we innovate our way into that increased quality and lower cost? And lastly, organizations that are starting to discover or grapple with this idea that maybe our leadership models are outdated. Not only are our pedagogical models outdated, the way we think about leadership might be wrong. It might be past Z, as we heard a little bit today. Here's maybe what this might look like in education. And what I would ask you to think about is, what does a school look like led by a multiplier who amplifies intelligence in the staff and faculty, who then become multipliers to students? And what does one look like led by what we call diminishers? Leaders perhaps so concerned about their own intelligence, their own knowledge, that they end up shutting down knowledge in people around them. And if all goes well, we're going to play a little video here.
We face what might be the challenge of this decade: to rethink and revitalize education at a time when the life we are preparing students for is changing as fast as
Maybe
our
not. It
budgets
looks like
are.
the video hasn't come through. Maybe we'll show that later. In fact, it looks like all the slides are a little screwed up. You'll have to use your imagination on a few parts of this. I'll fill in the details. Let me ask you to contemplate who was a multiplier to you. I want you to think about someone around whom you were smart. Maybe you did your very best work around this person. I also want you to think about someone who was a diminisher to you. Someone surrounded by smart people, but hard, complex problems just didn't get solved. I want you to think about, what did they do? And also, how much of your capability did they get? And maybe take 30 seconds, if you've got paper, an iPad, some sort of surface in front of you, mark it in your head if you want. What did this diminisher do? And what did the multiplier do? And then a number. How much of your capability did they get? on a scale of 0 to 100. 0, none. 100 is all of your intelligence, your insight, your capability. Take a second to think through that. Do you want to just go ahead and change it for me? That'd be great. Have you had a minute? Let me start with your diminisher. What did your diminisher do? And just shout it out. We're a small group here, so. They copy edited. Yeah, it's kind of the level they operate, at the copy edit level. They hold the information to the vest. It's hard to be smart when they do that. What else? Okay, they took credit. What else? Dismissive of ideas, other than perhaps their own. What else did they do? They called things impractical. Can't be done. What else? Controlling. Anything else that your diminisher did? How much of your capability did this person get? And I'm just going to have you shout this number out. We'll just go around the room, starting right here. On a scale of 0 to 100. And let me clarify, this is not a measure of how hard you were working. How much of your brain power was being used, engaged by this leader? 30, 20, 20.
I'm going to say 100, but part of it was to basically figure out how to survive the situation. So it wasn't, right?
Right, exactly.
It was absolutely, there was, I'd say that probably 40% of the effort was, how do I get around this situation?
Well, and it's what we find that people do around diminishers is a lot of their intelligence goes towards second guessing myself, managing politics, figuring out, is she going to want this information? Is it too much, too little? Should I say this? Should I not say this? Fairly unproductive. Any others? Yeah, how to navigate and how to sort of survive the situation. Any other thoughts? How much did your diminisher get? 60%. What would you call as an average across that? 20, 25%. We found in our research, looking at this across the business world, it was less than half, 48%. Across education, teachers, faculty members, K through 12 higher ed, about 40%. How about the multiplier? What did the multiplier do? Not much. They probably didn't copy edit, did they? They create the right environment. A leader who runs education for Microsoft, his people said, let's create an environment where good things happen. Good things happen around them, not dissimilar to what a brilliant educator does. Creating an environment where people can learn and operate at their best. What else did your multiplier do? Yeah, they may serve as a sounding board rather than a copy editor. I'm a writer, so I know what it means to be down into the copy edit mode. How much of your intelligence was being used? All of it. All of it at least? All of it plus. It was interesting when we did the research, I got data points like 100, 100, 90, 80. Those all made sense to me. And then I got a lot of data points, 110, 120. I'm like, I don't understand this. I'm kind of a math person. And so I'm like, okay, if 100% is all of your intelligence, all, how could you get 110? How could it really be 100 plus? It didn't make sense to me until I really kind of dug down in the data, and there was a very interesting message in that. Here's what we found. We found that there's a lot of things that these leaders do alike, but a few things that they do very, very differently. And it begins with their assumption, the belief they hold to be true, the diminisher assumption. And you might be thinking, what is it that your diminisher believed? Is that people aren't going to figure it out without? Me. You know, these are often leaders who are smart, knowledgeable, capable leaders who have built expertise, like many of us have. And what do they tend to do? It starts with how they manage talent. They love to hire smart people, but they tend to be empire builders, sort of hoarding talent, and maybe even putting talent on display like you would in a grandma's curio cabinet, pretty little objects to look at, but not to use. The environment they create, they're tyrants, and they're not always or even typically the yelling, chair-throwing tyrants. They just create anxiety. And what happens to our ability to think critically when we experience anxiety? There's probably some people in here who know the brain physiology to this one. The layman's answer is, you know, we just physiologically get stupid because the amygdala takes over, you know, takes the neural pathway that would normally go to the neocortex. The way they set direction, they tend to be know-it-alls. They set direction based on what they see, what they know. But they rarely ask other people to do things that they don't know how to do. I mean, when I listened this morning to those sort of semi-intractable challenges, what happens when a leader who's trying to drive innovation and change and improve quality, reducing costs and increasing access, when a leader only issues that challenge if he or she has figured it out themselves? They can never innovate. These leaders rarely drive innovation. They're decision makers. They make the decisions and then they run around trying to get other people to buy into them. You know, whereas multipliers reverse that logic. They frame an issue. They let people weigh in. What happens once you let people weigh in on a hard decision? It sets off a whole chain of reaction. I think this is one of the bad management fads we've been sort of deceived with, is this idea of buy-in. You know, stop asking people to buy into decisions you've already made, and counsel with people, create debates, let people weigh in, and you get all the buy-in that you could possibly need. They're micromanagers. They're down in the details. They're telling people what to do. They're copy editors. You can tell that comment really resonated with me. And we find they get less than half of people's capability. And you compare that to these multipliers, their logic is people are smart and they'll figure it out. I think Jamie from Google said that. You know, kids want to figure stuff out. But you know, it doesn't stop there. As adults, we want to be given hard problems and challenges and figure those things out. And here's what they do. For anyone who is taking notes, I brought a handout, and then there's all sorts of digitally available on our website. So if you're taking notes, no need. They're talent magnets. They're talent finders. They identify genius, unique genius, native genius, things people do easily and freely. They sense it, they find it, and then they put it to work at the highest problems. They're liberators. They create an environment where people can think, but in exchange for that, they ask for people's best thinking. They're challengers. They ask people to do hard things. They're drawn to these semi-intractable problems. I loved listening to Michael Crow this morning describe these challenges that he was putting out for his team and for the community and for all of us to figure out how to solve. That's challenger logic. They're debate makers. Weigh-in creates intelligence. Buy-in, people hold back. And they're investors. They push ownership and accountability onto other people. And we find is that they get virtually all of people's intelligence. And when we looked at this differential, we found it was two times out in the business community, and in the education community 2.3 times. Which brings us to this idea, is there latent intelligence in our schools, in our universities? Not just underutilized intelligence in our student body, but is our faculty and staff being grossly underutilized? I think so. You know, and really the idea behind this is, what could you do if you could get access to that intelligence? Here's what we also found. I've found that although we study these extremes, a lot of us are somewhere in between. And many of us are what we call the accidental diminisher. And these are the leaders, good people, a lot of them going into education, mission-driven, purpose-driven, good people who end up having a diminishing impact totally unaware. And let me share with you a few of the ways that we find that people do this. You might be thinking to yourself, how might I, with the very best of intentions, be having a diminishing impact? Let me share a few. I've got 6 here. Maybe we'll just focus on 3. Let me share a few that I am very vulnerable at. How many people in here are an idea guy? I'm an idea guy. These are like creative types. These are people who are just constantly thinking about, well, we could do this. They're fountain of ideas. They come into work, okay, we could do this, or what about this? I was talking to so-and-so, and they toss ideas out. What's the positive intent? It's not that my ideas are better. My ideas will stimulate other ideas, right? And we'll create an environment of innovation. What actually happens around the idea guy? Not a lot, right? Because what do? We're like, hey, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Let me do that. Okay, now Dave wants this. Okay, great, now he wants this. And so I'm back over here, and eventually you're like, let me just stay right where I am. Idea guys do not create environments of innovation. They've got a crazy innovation brain. I suffer from this one. How about the always-on leader? These are the people always on, always present, always engaged, always dynamic, always something to say. They think that their energy is infectious, right? But what actually happens around people who are always on? What impact do they have on others? As they draining, yeah, it's like you're killing me with this energy. And you're suffocating because as you expand like a gas and you take all the oxygen in the room, everyone's like, ah. And then what do we do to the leader who's always on? We turn them off. What do they sound like? Yeah, kind of white noise. Or maybe like wah, 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 the Charlie Brown teacher. How about the rescuer? This is the good person. This person might even be the Sunday school teacher. This person volunteers. This is passionate. Doesn't like to see people struggle or suffer or make mistakes or fail. And so when people are doing, and we want to protect their reputation, right? When people are about to make a big mistake or are even just stuck, we reach out and sometimes it's heroically save the day, right? But sometimes it's sort of innocuous. It's like, let me just help. What happens when the leader helps too early, too often? Diminishes people's confidence. You start to wait for the rescue, right? What else happens? Yeah, we starve our staff of the learning that they need to be successful. Those are just a few of the ways. I'm sure. Well, it says 6 minutes, but I think the whole thing is moving a little past time. Should we wrap up? Are you like, no, we don't have anywhere to go. Keep going. Like if you say, keep going, we want to see more accidental ways we diminish, I will keep going. Keep going? Okay. Someone's like, maybe mine is on the next page. Yours just might be on the next page. Okay. I think I've completely screwed this up. Let's see. Okay, but we don't really need, we have pictures. How about the pace setter? This is the person who says, I'm going to set the standard for innovation, for creativity, for speed, for agility. I'm going to set the pace, and other people will notice, and they will not follow being the right answer. What happens when the leader gets out ahead, a car length or two ahead? It's like my 8-year-old son. David knows my son. Joshua loves to race, spent the whole 2nd and 3rd grade racing mom to the bus stop in the morning. And he loved it because he won, or it was close. But sometimes I would forget, and I would remember that I was 48 years old, and this was perhaps the only person on the planet I could still run faster than. And so I would tear to the bus stop, and I'd get to the bus stop, won. And I look back, and what's Joshua doing? Saunters, exactly. He's sort of sauntering to the bus stop. And what does he say when he gets there? Got to channel your 8-year-old logic. Yeah, it's kind of no fair. It was even more tricky than that. I was like, we weren't racing that time, Mom. Right? Because isn't that what we say to leaders who get out ahead that we can't keep up with, who set this pace that is not sustainable, or it's not our pace, even our fastest pace? We end up becoming spectators. Like, hey, let me know if you need help when you lap me. But for now, I'm just going to watch you do your thing. And they have no idea that people aren't following them. How about the rapid responder? These are on it, see a problem, fix a problem, see a bear, shoot a bear. You know, they like go through their inbox every 21 minutes, clearing it out. They move fast, but what happens to people around them? And then what about one of my favorites? Because I struggle with this, the optimist. This is the positive, can do. We got it. We can do this kind of leader. How could this possibly be diminishing? Sometimes it's just not realistic. And what messages are we sending when we send out these messages of hope, and we can, and we should? I learned this one a couple years ago. I was working with a colleague, and it was a tough piece of research and writing and tight timelines and no money, you know, all the normal challenges that I thought was actually kind of fun. And at one point he stopped me and he said, Liz, I need you to stop saying that. And I said, well, saying what? He goes, you know that thing you say all the time. Had no clue, so, well, what's that? He goes, how hard can this be? How hard can this be? Hey, how hard can this be? And of course I'm recognizing logic going, oh yeah, that's what I say when it's like, we're smart, we can figure this out, we can do this, you know, how hard can this be? And he goes, that is the thing I need you to stop saying. I said, why? He says, Liz, what we're doing is actually really hard. And I need you to acknowledge that. And of course, I'm in my brain thinking, I can stop saying that because after all, how hard can that be? You know, I can do that. And I've learned to add whole new things to my vocabulary, like what we're doing is really hard. I'm not sure that this is going to be successful. This is risky. This is an experiment. We might fail at this. And I found that it allows other people to be optimistic as opposed to the leader being optimistic. You know, and maybe our last couple minutes, how might you, with the best of intentions, be shutting down smart, capable people? Maybe it's one of these. Any thoughts? Is there one that you recognize and want to shout it out? Because this is like, it's actually no easier than right now to confess, like, I'm an optimist. A perfectionist. What happens when the leader is a perfectionist? What does that do to innovation? Stifles it. What else? Maybe it's one of these. Maybe it's something different. Like Vinay. Any other insights? Let me leave with a couple final thoughts here. You know, what could you do to be more of a multiplier? You know, maybe if you're an idea guy like me, you learn to ask questions, and maybe you even take the extreme question challenge, where you try to lead something with nothing but questions. You know, maybe if you're always on, you could use, you know, play your chips. I kind of always carry chips with me, and you say, I'm going to limit my contribution in this meeting to 5 comments or statements in a meeting, and that's it. And by being a little smaller, I'm going to create room for others to be bigger, and then maybe even have my ideas more heard. Maybe if you're a rescuer, you learn to help, but then give the ownership and accountability back. Because once you help, who owns it? The helper. The helper always owns it, particularly if you're more senior in the organization. You have now just assumed accountability for that. Maybe you learn to give that back. Maybe you learn to give more ownership to people and saying, you know what, you get 51% of the vote on this. I'll be 49. Maybe if you're a rapid responder, you learn to make a debate. Or maybe if you're an optimist, you create a space where people can experiment and make mistakes, where things can be imperfect, where you're committing that you're not going to copy edit certain things. And then I guess the final, let me leave you with this as the final thought, and then I'll show a video if anyone wants to look at it and stay for it, is I was writing the first book, Multipliers, and I stumbled onto something that Bono had said about George Clooney for Time. He was describing him, the essence of Clooney, and he compares him to these two British prime ministers from the 1800s. He says, it's been said that after meeting with the great British Prime Minister William Ewart Gladstone, you left feeling he was the smartest person in the world. But after meeting with his rival, Benjamin Disraeli, you left thinking you were the smartest person. I think it's what a brilliant educator does. I think it's what a smart educational leader does. They use their intelligence to amplify the intelligence of others, to increase the confidence of others. They stay away from the model of genius, the one who has the answer, solves the problem, innovates. And they play the role of genius maker, creating an environment where innovation can flourish. And then let me maybe just share with you, I'll leave this a final thing. When I was out doing some teaching in business, I stumbled onto an 8-year-old boy named Harley from Australia. His father had been reading the book, and he said, "Dad, what are you reading?" And he told him, and he said, "You know, my coach, James, is a multiplier." And so he made this little video just to honor his coach, James. It starts with Harley, Lucas from Australia, and then I went into one of our local boys and girls clubs, and I just shared the ideas with a few kids and says, "What does it mean to be a multiplier?" And let me just leave you with their words. I thought it was kind of fun. Hopefully our audio is working.
My name is Harley, and today I'm going to talk about how to be a good leader. There's two types of leaders. There's a diminisher that makes you really sad and not as good as you can do. And there's a multiplier that makes you really good and helps you do your best.
What I think a multiplier is like someone that encourages you to do the right thing and always is helpful.
I think a multiplier is someone who helps you be smarter and they make you act smart around them.
Yes, multiplier is someone who uses like their own knowledge and their own talent to make you better as a person, who can get your potential out of you, who make you do your best.
I think a multiplier is a person who helps other people to be smarter and encourages them.
My name is Edward. A multiplier is someone who's encouraged someone else and encouraged them to be like, and makes them much smarter and feels it like happy.
What leader are you? A diminisher or a multiplier? See ya!
We are out of time. Thank you for engaging in the conversation. Does anyone have any questions or observations? And others, feel free to go on your way if you need to be somewhere. But I'll stay as long as anyone wants to talk. And I have some handouts here if anyone wants them. You can. Are there attributes of multipliers that aren't always positive, and are they lackadaisical? Let me address the lackadaisical. I'm not so sure about the aren't always positive. I've never thought about it that way. But what we do find is that multipliers tend to not be soft leaders. My publisher, she read the first draft of the first book, and she wrote me an email. She goes, "Well, wow, Liz, these leaders aren't really cupcakes and kisses kind of leaders, are they?" Because what we found is that most of these multipliers are really hard-edged. They're challenging, they're demanding, they're sort of exacting kind of leaders. Almost like, I see intelligence in you, and I'm going to extract it and put it to work on our hardest problems, and I'm going to do it relentlessly. You know, I remember one person talked about someone who was a multiplier to her, and she said, "This woman was shameless about asking other people to do hard things. You know, I was tired, but it was exhilarating." And so they create this kind of exhausting but exhilarating experience, whereas the diminishers, some of them are these kind of brutal leaders, egomaniacs, but a lot of them are just nice people, soft leaders, who end up creating an experience people describe as frustrating and exhausting. And I just find that so interesting that being used at a third, a half of our capability is exhausting, when working for a demanding, exacting leader is exhilarating. I haven't thought about, do they have some things that aren't positive?
Well, the first thing I'm thinking about might be classified as a venture. He gave people a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility. He was also a very absentee answer and very hard to get a hold of, unresponsive.
Yeah, sometimes multipliers are frustrating because people go to them and say, what should I do? Particularly people who've worked for historically for diminishers. Hey, tell me what to do. What should I do? Copy edit this for me. And a lot of times they push back and they say, you do it. Not dissimilar to a good parent. Yeah, sometimes we want to sort of delegate work up. Any other thoughts, comments? Thank you.